Good morning, LBC Radio. My name is Corey Rosen, and I am with the Story Podcast today. I have a super awesome guest, but before we get into that, if you want to support us, we have some merchandise. We have stickers on sale, and we have hoodies with the logo on the front, and the first 50 guests on the back, and that includes Mr. George Yellak. George has been playing drums since 1977. He did a bachelor's work in jazz studies with a concentration in percussion at the University of North Texas from 1983 through 86. He studied with Colin Bailey, a drummer of Vince Guaraldi. Did I pronounce that one right?
Vince Guaraldi, yes.
Vince Guaraldi. I've already forgot this one. Bissonnette, drummer of Woody Herman, David Lee Roth. Rick Latham from Quincy Jones, Clyde Lucas from Illinois Jacquette, and George has also toured as a drummer with rhythm and blues artists such as Little Joe Blue and Greg Smith. During that time, he shared the stage with names such as B.B. King, Johnny Taylor, Bobby Blue Bland, and a host of others. George has been playing jazz, funk, blues, and sacred music in the central Pennsylvania area for the past 30 years, working with artists such as Dave Wilson and Robin Work. His current creative musical project is a trio called the Go Particle. George has been playing and teaching guitar, bass, drums, and piano for the past 20 years. He is currently the music director of Wheatland Presbyterian Church in Lancaster and also served as an adjunct professor for Lancaster Bible College. And George has participated in many music training events, both locally and internationally. George, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
That's good.
I love how you tried to say Bobby Blue Bland. That's a tongue twister.
It is. I have so many speech impediments as it is, trying to figure out how to say stuff correctly. So when you were young, what got you inspired into music? What was it for you that made you want to bang on drums?
Well, that's interesting. My dad was an audiophile. So I was born in 1965. So in the late 60s, early 70s, he just loved music. He was not musical, but he loved music. So he also loved gear because he was an engineer for IBM, and he just had the best stereo equipment. So he always had, JBL speakers, Dynaco tube amps, and turntables, and reel-to-reel decks and all that. So I grew up from a very young age hearing lots of music. He bought tons of albums. When he died, he had about 2,500 albums, LPs, vinyl, all that. And then he got into every technology. He had CDs when they first came out, videotapes, laser discs, DVDs, all of that stuff. Big library. But I listened to lots of music young. So I just had the exposure, and he liked every kind of music except jazz and opera. And you can't fault a person for that, really. But he liked all forms of pop music and country music, and he liked classical music, and he had some big collections. And so I had the exposure. He had bought a home organ, and I started teaching myself songs. I think I was about 5 years old. And, sit there and play on the organ. And there was a book that was color-coded, and I would taught myself that stuff. But I don't know, my parents never picked up on it enough to get me lessons early. So I think I was around 12. And one day I took my brother's Indian Guide drum. He was in the Indian Guides, which is kind of like the Boy Scouts, but
Gotcha.
Native American themed. It probably doesn't exist anymore.
Oh.
Or they changed the name, I would imagine. And then like a Dallas Cowboys trash can and a bunch of little things, and I had some sticks, and I started banging, and then I had this cool hat, kind of like a pimp hat with a feather in it or something, like a 70s hat. I put it on, and I was sitting there drumming in the living room on my makeshift drum set. And, my family would walk by and look at me like, what's he doing? And it was like right then, I just knew. I'm like, I'm a drummer. And that was it. And I got drum lessons. I joined school band and played snare drum on a practice pad with a bell kit and did the whole band thing. Real involved in that and took lessons. And, yeah, from that moment on, Music was it.
So did you? And then I guess you assumed you went to college for music.
Yeah, it was a natural progression. I was in a school in Richardson, a suburb of North Dallas, and University of North Texas. It was called North Texas State University at the time. State school in Denton, just north of there. A lot of guys from my high school, which was a really large high school, ended up going to North Texas. And they had this great jazz program, world famous jazz program. And so I went there. State school was like $17 a credit hour
Wow.
if you were in state tuition.
That's not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad. That's practically free compared to now, right? Yeah. Yeah. So it was a no-brainer. So I went to North Texas to study drums, and studied with the guys that are in the bio there. They were all on staff in North Texas.
Yeah, that's something. You got some of those big names out there.
Yeah, they were just really qualified drummers, great teachers. So I had great background that way. And I was there 3 years, and I did all right. My grade average was a B, B average or whatever. And in my third year, I started playing. I had this fusion trio, drums, bass, and guitar, and I was the drummer. And the guitar player played for some rhythm and blues bands, and what they used to call the Chitlin circuit.
Tell me about that.
Well, it's in the South, right? And it's where all the blues clubs. So it's just like what you would say across the tracks back then, right? So it was just all African American community bars and all that, the Chitlin circuit, and
so did that
blues
run
scene.
Through cities?
Yeah. So this particular group, I started playing with them, and then, due to my youthful stupidity and stuff, my parents, who were helping me with school, were like, okay, whatever's in the bank, you take that. We're not helping you anymore. And I was like, okay, I'm playing in this band, and I'm learning more about playing jazz by playing in this blues band than I really was learning at school at the time. Because at school, I don't know, it was a strange experience. I remember I tried out for the lab bands. The University of North Texas has 9 big bands that meet every semester. That's what they're famous for. They're called the lab bands. So they have the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, all the way to the 9 o'clock. And that's a lot of jazz bands, right?
A lot of jazz bands.
Yeah. You would think it's a lot of jazz bands, but for the amount of people that show up to try out for them, it's not. So because of that, each band down from the 2 o'clock down has 2 rhythm sections, so they can just have enough slots to get the students in, right? And the rhythm sections rotate and what have you. Anyway, I remember I did one audition for the lab band, and the music said to play a shuffle, and I played. So a shuffle is, one guy explained it to me like this: it's shuffle, 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 shuffle. Right. Well, I don't know. I was 20, and I didn't know that.
Right.
I should have. I probably should have known that, but I didn't. And I figured that's what I'm going to school for. So all these guys are great teachers, but none of them said, hey, play me a shuffle. Let me hear how your shuffle sounds. And then they would realize that I didn't know it. So I never got. And so after the audition, consulting with one of these teachers, he's like, why didn't you play a shuffle? And I was like, I thought it just meant to swing. Ding, ding, to ding, ding, to ding. That's swing, right? So, but when I got into the blues band, there were these older cats, the sax players and all that, and they would look back and they would, man, your shuffle is just... One sax player, he's like, hey, he said, look, I'm not a drummer, but... I know what a shuffle's supposed to sound like, so if you would just give me your stick, I'll play it on the cymbal for you. So now, see, this is a point where a lot of young guys kind of mess up because of their ego or whatever, and they go, you're not going to tell, who do you think you are, blah, blah, and they would, but I was like, humble at that point, and I said, yeah, sure, show me. And so he took my stick and he played the shuffle on my cymbal. Ding, cha-ching, cha-ding, cha-ching. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And so the bottom line there is I'm working with a horn section, the same things that North Texas was teaching me, how to kick the rhythms of the horns and do all the things that you do in a big band. And I was learning it better in the rhythm and blues band. And I kind of had this choice. Well, I could get some student loans, stay in school, but I got this gig, and it would really be hard to do this gig because they traveled a lot and stay in school.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'm going with the band. And so I did that for the next few years and traveled around with them. And it was a great experience because it was all ends of the spectrum. They would do things like play a big blues fest in another city, say in North Carolina or Tennessee or somewhere, or Mississippi. And so we would go out to do that blues fest, and that would be, like a big show, like 15,000, 20,000 seater hall or whatever, with 5 bands lined up on it. And on the way out, we would stop at all these blues dives. So they would fill the trip out with gigs on the way out there and the way back. So I was getting like both ends of the spectrum, playing the big, high energy PA light and all of that kind of scenario, and then going and playing in the clubs late at night on the way back. And that was a great experience, and I did that for the next few years.
So what was your next step after that?
Well, I played with Little Joe Blue. I played with a couple of different acts, and the band, Greg Smith is mentioned on there. His horn section worked for a guy named Johnny Taylor. Johnny Taylor had several hits, like the song, Who's Making Love to Your Old Lady? I don't know if you ever heard that, but that was his big hit. And his horn section played with the Greggs. They would travel with him, and then when they were in town, they would play with the Gregg Smith band. And so they decided to form their own band and just back up different blues front guys. All right. So, and then that's how we hooked up with Little Joe Blue. And Little Joe Blue, he was the real deal. He was friends with B.B. King, and he sounded a lot like him. And he just did that straight, Mississippi blues. He was from Louisiana, lived in Texas. And so I did that. And when at one point he said, I'm going to L.A., I'm going to cut an album. And he did, as far as I know, but he never came back. I never heard from him again. So the next thing I did is I got a gig with something completely opposite. It was an 80s R&B band. And by R&B, I mean like Janet Jackson, Michael Bolton, the 80s pop music,
Right.
Pop dance music, right? And it was all covers, but it paid well. And we did all like the clubs in Dallas and traveled to different cities and did army bases and all that kind of stuff. It was a high energy dance band. And it was completely opposite, where the blues thing was all feel and dynamics and stretching, and
More improv than
this
that.
was this R&B thing was, the keyboard player had a Commodore 64 computer where he had all the tracks. Basically, he had all these keyboards that it would trigger, and he would hit the space bar, and we would play along with the sequence. So I was drumming on real drums, but he had all these keyboard parts and bass parts programmed. And so the whole first set was just, he'd hit the space bar and it would play an entire set, and we would play along with it.
Oh, wow.
Which was cool at first and a challenge, but then it got to be what I would call mental slavery. And that got old after a while. And I had already met my wife. I met her while I was playing the blues gig. And she, at the time, was working for what you would call, it was a new thing. They called it a partial day treatment center.
Mm.
And I guess now you would call that something like intensive outpatient or whatever. But what it was, kids that needed treatment for emotional problems and stuff like that. And they would go there during the day and they would go to school, but they lived at home. So she was working there, and I thought, and this was before I started playing with the R&B band I was talking about. I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool. Like, working with kids.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know why I thought that. It's kind of an irrational thought.
Why? What do you think?
Well, because I was all about music. I was, I wanted to be an artist, that whole thing. And why I thought working with kids would be great, I don't know. But I did, and I guess that's sort of the difference between a vocation and a calling.
Mm.
So music is kind of a vocation, yes. And it's a calling. Like I said, I kind of knew I was going to be a drummer for some weird reason. Just no real reason at all. The calling thing, my attitude was always, when things were put in front of me, people would ask me to do things, or they would be doing things, and I would see that they needed to be done, and I would say, yeah, I'm game for that. Let me give that a try. So that was kind of the same thing. I thought, well, that's meaningful, like working with kids. So I looked for a job because I wanted to move to Fort Worth, the same city she lived in. So I looked for a job, and I found one with Catholic Charities. And what it was a residential treatment program. In other words, it was a home where the kids lived. And really what it was it was kids that were removed from custody from their parents for whatever reasons.
Gotcha.
Neglect, abuse, and that kind of stuff.
Kind of like a foster program, maybe?
Yeah, no, these were kids that actually their parents either lost temporary custody or lost full custody. And
more of like a CPS operation, maybe.
Yeah, kind of. I really didn't know. That was not my end of things, the legal whatever, right? But basically what we would do is we'd go there. I was what was called a milieu therapist. And, I worked on weekends, so they weren't going to school or whatever. We would do activities with them and wake them up, take them to breakfast. Like, we were there the whole time. We're kind of the parents or whatever. Mm-hmm. Didn't pay well, but very rewarding. Mm. And it kind of set the stage for things I would do later in life, and it gave me a certain skill set.
Yeah, I tell you what, working with children is some of the best stuff that I've ever done. I teach children how to swim, and it's it's painful in some ways because they'll grab you or they'll kick you in places you don't want to be kicked or grabbed. But the reward afterwards, it's when you can see a child come to you scared, and then they come to you confident and be able to float on their back all by themselves.
Right.
It's so rewarding, and I'm sure it's a similar story.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing about the callings. I remember when I was in high school, my neighbor, the neighbor ladies or whatever, they'd be like, "Oh, I hear you play drums. Can you teach my 5-year-old how to play drums?" Mm-hmm. And again, it's like, well, I don't really know how to teach. Sure, why not?
Sure.
So, each time you accept something that you don't really necessarily have a skill set for and try to meet that challenge, you start to get that skill set, and then you see the fruits of it, right? Mm-hmm. So the fruits of working with kids was that, I started to see that I was good with that, right? And then also that I was getting joy from seeing light bulbs go off, right? That's mm-hmm. that's the thing that I think the natural teachers, when I say natural teachers, people that are gifted to teach, because there's a lot of people that are good at what they do, but they're not. Yeah. They don't have the gift of teaching and just the ability to communicate to somebody and then have them,
Have it
the
retained.
light bulb go
Yeah.
off, and then you really enjoy that, and you go, yeah.
Yeah, that is something I learned of teaching music. There's a skill to learning it, and there's a skill to teaching it, and those are often very different places.
Yeah, very different places. And I think one of the reasons I like to teach is because I like to learn.
Mm.
So I get bored easily. Like, when I was in school, like when I was in college, I also played bass. The bass department, they wanted me to switch to bass.
Right.
Why did I play bass? Well, I don't know, because I was a drummer and I wanted to compose, and it's like things open up and I want to learn these other skills because I want to do other things, and I don't just kind of stick with one thing all the time. So those learning processes, I kind of take the student on a journey with me. So when students come into my studio, for instance, doing private lessons or whatever, and I'm working on some side project, it's music related. Maybe I'm like, for a time I got into hammering cymbals because I'm a jazz drummer and the cymbal sound is very important.
Yes, very much
Right.
so.
Yeah. And it's like, and then I got on a website where these guys modify their cymbals. They hammer them and they lathe them, take weight off, all this stuff. And so I would get on this big learning experience, and I would share that with my students. So my students would see that, in other words, what helps them learn is to learn the joy of learning. It's pretty simple, right?
Yeah, and that's something I think that is lost on today is the learning is a lot of fun. It's just people make learning unfun with certain ways.
Yeah, there's a poem in there somewhere.
There's a song in that for sure. There's probably a whole book on that.
Learning the fun of making learning unfun. Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Well, because it's true. Because today you have to take tests, and tests are not fun. It's such a high pace thing where you're forced to retain this information, but not in a healthy way that makes you learn. A test today, or at least when I'm in school, it's more of a you have to learn this for this certain outcome. It's not because it's fun to learn this. It's because you have to learn this.
Well, that's the problem with quantifying everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that the test is bad. It's that the purpose of taking the test is, in my view, the purpose of taking the test is to show you what you don't know.
Yeah.
Not to show what you know.
Right.
Right? To me, taking the test is a learning experience.
Yeah.
Oh, I got this wrong. That means I don't know this. That's what I need to learn next.
Right.
But when so much weight is put on the quantifying the grade, and you can't afford to have those missed points, now all of a sudden you're missing the point of the test. Now the point of the test is I have to ace this test,
right?
Because the point is the grade point at the end, not finding out what I don't know and then continuing the learning, right? So probably there are ways to organize, obviously in classes and things like that, you have to have standards and procedures and all. And there's probably ways to organize it where the tests are weighted lower in the beginning so you can afford to miss things on the test or whatever. That's what the quiz used to be for. Here's a test that doesn't count for a lot.
Right.
And it shows you what you don't know, all right? But I think with today's grade point average being so overemphasized, it's hard for people to get into that mindset.
Right, yeah. And that's why at LBC there was a teacher, Dr. Carver, and I loved his style of teaching because his style of teaching was that you could take 3 tests, and whatever was highest is what you got. So it afforded you to be wrong, and it was low pressure.
Exactly.
And I learned so much more from that class. I know so much more about the Old Testament than I do the New Testament because of the way his tests were structured like that. Because I could take it, first off, I had to take it 3 times, so I had to retain the information at least thrice.
Right.
And then I know the information that is wrong now, and I know now that what is right. So whenever like apologetics or something comes up, something that's completely unrelated to the purpose of the Old Testament testing, I can now say with authority, I know this because I got it wrong twice.
Exactly. Exactly, because it's in making the mistakes that you really learn.
Yeah.
Those are, how you learn your life lessons, basically.
I can't tell you how over this podcast is learn from your mistakes. Your mistakes aren't what define you, and that's what the tests say, though, that your mistakes are final, and you can't go back and fix it.
Right. No, I agree.
So you grew up in Texas. What made you come over to Lancaster?
Well, my wife, Darlene, she's from Lancaster County.
Oh.
So, but I have a Pennsylvania history because my dad was from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And my great-grandfather and my grandfather, they both worked for Bethlehem Steel.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up coming to Pennsylvania every year of my childhood. We would drive from Texas to Pennsylvania.
Drive?
Oh, yeah.
I guess that's the only way. Not the only way, but that's kind of how you did it, I guess.
Plane tickets were expensive back then. Yeah, very expensive. So I have, two sisters and a brother, so we had a family of 6. So we didn't fly often. We did fly, but no, we would drive. And so I had aunts and uncles, and my mom was from Long Island, New York. So all my family was up here, the extended family. Only my immediate family lived in Texas.
Why is that?
Well, my dad got drafted.
In which war?
In Vietnam. And all the other guys of his training, I don't know what you call it, but in boot camp, those guys all went to Vietnam, but they sent him to Duncanville, Texas, which is south of Dallas. And so that's how I ended up there. And he loved it there. He never wanted to come back east after that. So
fair enough. All of my mother's side of my family is from Texas, so all of the extended family is in, where Carthage is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of where she was born in Tyler, if you know where that is.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
been there many, many times.
Yeah, so that's where my entire family is based out. So there's Galveston, and then there's Baton Rouge, where family is at. So that's really interesting.
The Texas-Pennsylvania connection, we call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've made that drive every year of my life. In fact, we just drove down there for my niece's wedding.
Nice.
And I got back last week.
So what was it like to move up here? I guess it wasn't a cold move, because you kind of had the connections a little bit.
Well, yeah, I had the connection to Pennsylvania. So we were living in Fort Worth when we got married, but we had the wedding up here. And we had planned to have it at the Rockford Plantation, which is in Lancaster County Park. And we had the wedding here because, all my family from the East Coast, my extended family, could get out there easily. But then the first year of our marriage, we lived in Fort Worth. And then her dad, who did a lot of work over in India, had a property, and he wanted to go to India for like 6 or 8 weeks. And he said, why don't you guys come up here and watch the property for me? So we had this plan. We were going to come up and watch his property. We kind of move up here, and then sort of figure out what hip city do we want to move to, and then move again, right? But it didn't work out that way. We put down roots and all of that kind of stuff, and we stayed. So I'm in Lancaster. And honestly, the first day that we moved there, we were in Leola, and it was a Sunday. The first day I woke up, I think we got there on a Saturday and unloaded all our stuff. And I woke up on Sunday, and it was really quiet, and all I could hear were like buggies clip-clopping out on the street. And I looked down, there was nothing. And I'm like, wow, I kind of moved out into the middle of nowhere. But that night, we decided to drive over to Route 30, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's a city.
Yeah. Lancaster it's really weird because you literally within 15 minutes of driving outside of Lancaster, it is just farm.
Yeah, it's farms. Yeah,
it's farms.
So it's cool that way.
It's cool. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really nice because it's nice and quiet outside of the city, and yeah, you get for whatever reason, the Amish clip clops are really loud. I've noticed that, and sometimes they're really out late at night. I don't know why, but
that's the young people probably.
Probably.
So Yeah, I mean, and there's a lesson in that too
Yeah.
that relates back to music for me. Um, because in Dallas, so I'd done all this rhythm and blues stuff, but I wanted to be a jazz musician.
Mm.
Ultimately, was the thing I wanted to do. And there's a lot of jazz gigs in Dallas, but there's also a lot of jazz musicians. You have University of North Texas there, and there really aren't that many jazz gigs. Um, so I wasn't really playing jazz in Texas. I was playing a lot of other types of music and all that. And both Darlene and I were, I want to say I was a Christian, but I wasn't following Jesus, and we were both kind of in that same spot.
Right.
And I had a lot of ambiguity in the way I was raised in the faith. My dad was basically an atheist or an agnostic or whatever. And my mom, she never lost her faith. So I had a lot of misconceptions or whatever. So when we really came back to Christ, and then moved up here, it wasn't long after that. One of the first things we did, I saw that there was a jazz jam at a club or a room that is no longer there. And so we went to it, and there was a drummer named Aaron Walker there who was a great local jazz drummer. He's since moved to San Antonio, part of the Texas-Pennsylvania connection. And I said to him, hey, there were things about my playing that after doing all that touring and everything, there were things I was like, not right. Like my bass drum pedal technique wasn't right. And I wanted to work on some stuff. So I said, hey, who's a good teacher in the area? And he said, well, the guy you want to call is Clyde Lucas, who's mentioned in the bio there. So I called Clyde Lucas, and it's just one of those things about God gives you the desires of your heart. Because Clyde is this fantastic jazz drummer, gifted teacher, and Christian.
Oh, wow.
And Aaron wasn't a Christian. The drummer that I, asked. Cool guy, but I don't think he's a Christian. And so I called Clyde, and his answering machine picked up, and it was something like, blessings in the name of Jesus or something on his answering machine. I'm like, wow. And so I started taking lessons with him. And immediately, out of that came him referring me to gigs he had been playing and didn't want to play anymore. And I started to play jazz in the area. And I got to do the thing that ultimately a misconception I had as a really young believer was that, well, I want to play jazz so much, it's like an idol or whatever. Like to follow Christ, I can't be a jazz musician.
Right.
Totally not true, obviously.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean that's an interesting aspect of it. So it's like it was part of God's will for me to be in Pennsylvania. All of the things that have come out of that, and that's another thing I learned moving. Moving is interesting because you move to a new area. When I was young, I had misconceptions about that too. And it's like, wow, this area is so different, et cetera, et cetera. But people are, I don't know, pretty much this. People are people everywhere you go, right? Yeah, there's cultural differences. And God's will is wherever you go. I think you have that liberty. Like God had a will for me in Texas if I didn't come up to Pennsylvania, which would be different, but he also had a will for me up here. And so you just got to stay in it.
Yeah, it's
right.
God's going to use you wherever you are.
Right.
It might look different, but he's going to use you regardless.
Yeah. So that's how I got to PA, and it's been a very, very cool thing ever since.
Yeah. So what are some things what are some of the lessons that you have taken from the older population when you worked in Texas, right? And how have you applied that to your philosophy of music?
So, like I was saying about the older cats.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, those guys taught me a whole lot of stuff, and they weren't always nice about it. So, if you're like if you go into professional music as a player, you kind of have to have thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell when I have students that get easily discouraged by criticism. I hate criticism, and
Who likes it?
yeah, who likes it, right? And so, being from my family background or whatever, my first reaction to criticism is anger. Right? So I'm just going to get mad at you. In my mind, I'm going to start cutting you down,
criticizing you
instead. Well, I don't know. But with guys that care, I'm not that way. Like I was talking about this sax player, the way he said it and the way he approached it, and I'm eager to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just knowing that I don't know everything, that's a good start. And if you do that, then you can pretty much learn from anybody. But these guys were constantly, telling me what I was doing wrong and telling me what I was doing right. So, the thing that I learned the most by playing on the blues circuit was playing in those dive bars. You go down there, and people are there to forget about their troubles,
have fun. Yeah.
and in that particular environment, they don't really care about your polished presentation.
Right.
You have to come on with it, right? You have to put it out there. And Little Joe Blue, I can think of one instance where that really hit home, because we would do these big shows and we would do all these gigs, and one day we were playing locally in Dallas, and we played a room. And the way these groups usually work is the band will play a set, and then the head of the band, the headliner, he comes out the second and third set. So we played our set, and the band's pretty lackluster because this club had like 5 people in it. Right? It's like, okay, the night's kind of a wash. There's 5 people in this club.
Right.
But we played, it's not like that we played bad, but we definitely were not putting it out there,
Right.
But Little Joe Blue came on, and he was just singing his heart out. And the whole band, after that set was done, one of the guys said, "Man, Joe, you were really coming on with it." Like, and Joe said, "Well, those 5 people, they paid their $10.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot from that. And just my experience playing since then, I've come to realize that no matter what situation I'm playing in, whether it's in the basement of a church for some event that somebody organized, and I don't really know who's there, and I don't know what impact what we do will have on that person. So it may be the first time that a certain person has heard this kind of music in their life, and it may just be mind-blowing for them. Right? So I just kind of keep that open, and like, no matter where I am, this matters.
Right. It can be very discouraging when there's only like 5 or one person like looking at you or whatever, but you got to realize that some of these people are, for example, I'm an introvert. I hardly went anywhere. You remember Matt Cross? Matt Cross is the only reason why I ever went out of my room in my freshman year, because he would drag me out to all these places. And when I went out to like the open music scene, they really played their heart out. I don't think I'd be in the open music scene had they not played their heart out when there was like nobody there.
Right. Yeah. And it's actually, it doesn't matter how many people are there to me anymore.
Right.
Because I'm playing for the joy of the music. And that's the other thing is, and so all of the things that I end up doing with teaching or working with kids, or playing music live or leading worship, I'm a music director at a church. all of those things complement each other in terms of philosophy
Mm-hmm.
and the spirit of it, and how you go about thinking of it. So like with teaching, students have performances, they have recitals, right? And a lot of times I will accompany them on the recital. And it's just this thing of I'm playing with a lot of students, young ones, children, teenagers, all, lead worship with various musicians. Again, it could be teenagers, people that aren't professional musicians,
Mm-hmm.
people that have different skill levels and backgrounds. And no matter what's going on in the music, not a large percentage of the time, I'll say it this way, a large percentage of the time that I'm playing music on some whatever level, what's going on at the moment somehow is not what I'm necessarily hoping for, or it's not quite there, right? But what I'm doing is every single second I'm doing that, I'm waiting for that moment that surprises me and experiencing the joy of it, right? And as soon as that starts to happen and you get a little bit of that joy going, that was the point. That was the point of the whole thing. And by doing that, whoever else is in the room, I'll say the audience, whoever else is in the room, they feel that moment. And it might be the only moment that really mattered. I often say this to musicians when they're playing. I say, people with songs, it's funny. People remember the beginning of the song and the ending of the song and everything that happens in between. You can get away with a lot. Right? Which is true to some extent.
Yeah.
It's like a first impression, a last impression. If those are strong, people tend to say, yeah, that was really good. If those are weak, even if you had a lot of beautiful stuff going on in the middle, people will be like, yeah, it was okay.
Right.
But that aside, if you don't find any joy anywhere in there, people will be like, okay, that is what it was. But if you find the joy, somebody is going to come up to you and say, that really meant a lot to me. Which happens all the time when I do things, and I know there were tons of wrong notes and there's a lot of bogus stuff in there. And on a professional career musician level of speaking or whatever, it was subpar, right? Subpar, but I don't care. It doesn't matter if it's subpar, because what matters is it did its job, which is to touch somebody somehow.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it. But, there's all different levels of music. And so if you're playing in a pit orchestra for musical theater, you can't think like that.
No.
Everything has to go a certain way.
Yes.
Right? It's on a clock and there's performers in sync.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a performance. Okay. So I kind of separate out performance from music. I look at music as a more organic social interaction, whereas a performance is a presentation
Scripted.
of such.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's something of interest that you've kind of had, because you have done gigs, but you also do performances and are in pit. How did you get into it? How did you transition from the gigging economy to the more pit orchestra performance economy?
Well, it just goes back to that idea of if something is put before me, and I'll say, okay, sure, I'll give that a shot. So, like after I moved to Pennsylvania, I played with the Harrisburg Community Orchestra or something. Somebody just asked me to do it, and I said, okay, yeah. I'm not really qualified, but I'll give it a shot. Right? Same thing for pit orchestras. So there's this show or that show that somebody. I mean, I don't do a lot of that, but I've done enough of it to know how it works and to know how to do it fairly decently, I think.
And well, you also converted as if it's like a religion, from drums to bass.
Well, yeah. In fact, I've been playing bass. Like I did a gig Friday in Lebanon playing jazz bass, and like I said, well, see, that's early on. That's
That
just
was
kind
early
of
on,
how
okay.
my personality works. So I was playing drums. I got my first drum set when I was 14 for my 14th birthday, and I played it for a few months. And then I was, playing the drums, and I'm like, "Hey, Dad, I I think I need to play something with notes on it, because I mean the drums are just
Just things you
sounds,
hit, yeah.
and I want to be able to maybe write music or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think I should get a bass. It's related to drums; they work hand in hand with each other." And he said, "All right, if you save the money to get a bass, then I'll put in the other half for the amp." So that's what I did, and I started playing bass. So I was playing bass when I was 14, and the first band that I ever played in was a junior high, middle school band called Defiance. And they would play at the middle school. They were a band already, but then their bass player moved or something,
Mm.
and so they needed a bass player. So the first band I played in was bass, not drums.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I thought I was better than the drummer. The drummer actually, he ended up being a jazz singer, kind of a Harry Bublé type guy. He works in Dallas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Um, so I followed him on Facebook when I was on social media, which I'm not on anymore.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, I look at it this way. I think the simplest way to explain it is when somebody gives you something for free, you're the product.
Mm.
And so it's a trade-off. You say, okay, for the sake of my convenience to be able to talk to my friends easily or whatever, I'll be your product, is basically what you're saying. And you can use all of this data about me to do whatever you do.
Mm-hmm.
Carte blanche. You don't really know what they do with it. So I would say what they do with it, but who knows? They do whatever they want with it. Exactly. And you might say, well, you can't fight that, right? Mm-hmm. So you might as well just join it. But that just goes against my conscience. I mean, it's inconvenient. There's a lot of things I could do if I, say, had Facebook or Instagram or some other social media platforms, but it's not worth going against my conscience. It's like I can't avoid them having data about me, because anybody that's looked into technocracy, if you're familiar with that term, technocracy, if you look into it, there's all kinds of ways to collect data, right?
There's
so
all sorts of ways.
I'm not pretending that I'm hiding from big tech or that I'm hiding from the government or whatever, that they don't have all that data. They obviously do.
They have a number on you. It's a social
yes.
security number.
So my bottom line there is I'm just not going to volunteer that information to them. I'm just not going to hand them that. They can go all their back channel ways and get it all and put together their profiles or whatever. But I don't want to just hand it to them. So
how's that challenge you in regards to gigs, dude?
Well, it's like, how many gigs did I get? I got gigs through Facebook and things like that. Yeah, sure. Local musicians would contact me that way. But I think those musicians still know how to contact me. I have phone number, contacts lists, all that kind of stuff. So anybody that really wants to find me can. Yeah.
Fair enough. So how'd you get the gig at the music director of Wheatland?
Well, that's an interesting process. Let me see if I can get everything in the right order. What happened there? We went to a non-denominational church, Petra, out in New Holland, and we were there for almost 10 years. And with a guy named Dave Helmuth, who has Ad-Lib. It's called Ad-Lib Music. It's a ministry that helps churches and worship pastors develop their programs and offers coaching and stuff like that. He was hired by Petra to build a program there, And so I worked with him on that for a couple of years. And then they needed a tech director. That's someone who might think of it as the sound guy, but it's so much more than that, right? And they have giant screens, and they've got all the video stuff, and they have that in lots of different rooms and for different events. So I was a tech director for a year, and then I got really kind of burned out on that whole process. But in the meantime, people seem to be recommending that the guy who had recently assumed the chair of the music department at LBC, Dan Hollingsworth, he kept hearing through the grapevine that he should pursue me to be an adjunct professor because they needed like guitar teachers and stuff like that. So Dan Hollingsworth called me in and interviewed me, and I started working with LBC, Lancaster Bible College. And at the same time, I had stepped down as the tech director at that church, and I was like, I'm ready for a change church-wise, right? And so we decided to visit Wheatland Presbyterian. And at Wheatland Presbyterian, when we first walked in, the first guy I saw was a guy named Matt Monticchio.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Matt Monticchio I had played with before he went to college. I think he was between high school and college. There was this, Dave Wilson had this band called the Young Sounds. It was a big band made up of young players, high school, college age guys. And at the time, I was like the old ringer. I was playing drums, so I was almost 30. I don't remember how old I was, but I was probably about 30. But I considered myself too old to be playing in that band. And at any rate, I had met Matt, but then Matt went off to college, and I hadn't seen him. So this is like, it had to be 10 plus years later, something like that. And I walked in, and Matt was there. And we walked into Wheatland, and they have... It's this building that used to be a not Christian Science. What's the churches that have
Scientology?
Not Scientology, no. Mary Eddy was the founder of it.
Oh no.
Anyway, yeah, the Christian Science Church. Yeah,
Scientology.
Something like that. It's not Scientology.
It's not,
that's different. Scientology's like L. Ron Hubbard. It's not that. Yeah, those are two different things. Anyway, this building has like big glass windows and it was natural light. And, we were kind of in the modern church that was all closed off, lights, we had lights on stage and all that kind of stuff. And so we walked in there and I'm like, oh yeah, this is refreshing. And the music was refreshing too, because being Presbyterian, the song leader wasn't the worship leader. Okay, you have a guy that stands at the pulpit, and there's an order of worship. It's almost like a liturgy, and he leads the worship service. And the musicians are off to the side. And I was like, that's cool. I like that. Because one of the things that was kind of burning me out about church was the whole stage environment. It goes back to this performance versus music thing. And yeah. So, I'm not knocking the more performance-oriented approach, but that wasn't for us at the time. So, and I really liked that, and so we started going to Wheatland. And it turned out that Dr. Bigley, he was going to Wheatland, and so there were all these connections. And soon, I soon started playing with Matt, and we formed a Go Particle. So that's what the Go Particle is. And what was really funny about that is about a year down the road, 9 months into us going to Wheatland and all, me doing the band, playing with Matt, we were recording. We recorded our first CD. It's called Press a Button. And on the very last day of recording, we were recording at his house with his acoustic piano, and I had my drums. I was tearing down my drums, and he basically told me he's stepping down as the music director of Wheatland. I was like, oh, man, really? So he did that. Now, I had come off this being the technical director at Petra, and I had vowed to myself, when we go to this new church, I'm not getting involved in ministry. I had played in worship. I had been involved in worship ministry ever since we were Christians in the early 90s, just constantly. Mm-hmm. And so I vowed, I'm like, I am going to go to church and sit in the pew like everyone else and go home. And I'm not getting involved in ministry. And so that's what I did, right? But I was playing with Matt. I was playing in the worship there. But the idea of working for the church, having a position at the church, I was totally against that. So Matt left, and they advertised the position. It was very cut down in hours, and it was like, they put it out there. And I remember we were in church the day they announced that they were advertising the position. They were announcing the position being open. And this little ding went off in the back of my head. Ding. You could do that. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I vowed I'm not doing that. And so I didn't. And so they went without a music director at Wheeland for a good 9 months.
Wow.
And people just kept dropping hints at me, and you should be doing this. Why aren't you doing this? Mm-hmm. You should be doing it. I kept saying, no, don't tell me that. I'm not doing it. Finally, they said to me, hey, would you just sit down, Dr. Bailey, Luke Leduc, he's the pastor. They all said, hey, would you just sit down and discuss with us why nobody's responding to our, position? Which were there some obvious reasons, which I won't go into. But I was like, okay, yeah, I'll sit down and talk with you about that. Well, out of that discussion, I realized it was what God wanted me to do. It was time to do it. So that's how that happened. And I accepted it, and that was going on 11, 12 years now.
Nice.
It's been great. I had a big learning curve on that. I mean, that's one of those things that was in front of me to do. It's like, okay, lead worship at a Presbyterian church. Well, I played drums for worship teams at contemporary churches and all that, but I don't know. They cover a broad spectrum of church history and history of church music. I don't know anything about that. I could barely play a hymn, let alone, direct the music or whatever. So there was a big learning curve on it. And it's been great. I've got a whole new skill set. And like I said, all the things that you decide to do build your skill set. So, I work with a ministry called Swan. And what we do is we go into public schools and teach music to kids that have parents that are incarcerated, right? And then we do performances. So we lead groups. So like I'll have 20 kids doing percussion or whatever, and I have to direct them. So this idea of being like a music director, that was new to me 10 years ago. Mm. I couldn't conduct. Like, I didn't know how to conduct or any of that stuff, right? So all those skills, they complement each other, like doing this work with kids and working with students and being a church music director and playing gigs in bars and,
it just all comes together.
Playing performances and musical pits, right? All of those things just give you this broad skill set. So I'm more of a generalist that way as opposed to a specialist. I could be a lot better drummer. Like, I would say drums are my primary instrument, the thing that I'm the most comfortable on. Well, I could be a lot better if all I did was focus on drums and only play drums and only play percussion. Mm-hmm. So that's just not who I am. So I play guitar and piano and bass. And
yeah, sometimes it's more useful to be a generalist than a specialist.
Well, yeah, it's different, right? It's just you got to be true to, you got to play to your strengths. So my strengths are, because I play bass and drums and piano and guitar, I understand what everything in a rhythm section should do.
Right.
So if I'm a director, I have an advantage over a director who's just a vocalist.
Yeah.
They don't really know. They might know what they're not hearing from their players in the rhythm section, but they don't know how to communicate it. But I know how to communicate it because I play all those instruments and I know, do this, mute that note. I can tell them specifics because I know how to do that. So It's a trade-off. It's like,
yeah. So you are a very thoughtful person, it seems. How does one, and you're talking about your Christian faith and all of these different things. How did that impact your playing, what you would play, how you would approach people at these gigs, bars, etc.?
well, that's an evolving process. So I think the way it is now, I've come to some kind of unity, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. I'm trying to formulate the words. Yeah, I don't approach playing at a bar much different than I approach leading worship at church. There are a couple of different, I think there's one important distinction between worship, using music in worship, and using music as entertainment. Okay, and it's in the definitions of those things themselves. So the way I understand the definition of entertainment, and the way I understand it from me entertaining people in clubs and stuff like that, you want to keep the attention on yourself.
Right.
That's what entertainment means, to hold somebody's attention. They're not entertained if they get bored and they're looking at the TV. And if you're playing in a bar or a restaurant or whatever nowadays, that's a very real
thing.
real thing, right? They're not really listening to the music. They're watching the TV or whatever. So in entertainment, you're holding the attention on yourself because you're entertaining them. And in worship, you're holding their attention towards the Lord. Okay, it's an important distinction. And it's gray area, right?
Sure.
It's gray area, and it's hard to walk. You got to walk a fine line about how you do that. So it goes back to what I was saying about the joy part, though. That's the part that's the unifying thing that underlies both of them. If I can approach that from the same way, then I don't have to turn switches and go, okay, I'm in church now, this is this switch, and now I'm in a club, this is this switch. So basically what it is I'm looking for those moments of joy. And those moments of joy have to come from a place of humility. So I think most of the time that I lead worship in church and I show up, showing up's half the battle. But when I get there, it's like I really don't have much to give here because my life is such a mess. And I've organized this the best that I can, but this band might fall apart. and, or whatever, like all these things that are, they're not in my power to make happen. I'll put it that way. I've done my best, or I've not done my best, and now I've got to sit with that, whatever. And it's like, okay, Lord, this is your thing, right? So you start from that place of it's not your thing. It's God's thing. And then all of these people, the people that are here to worship, and you're providing a musical environment for them to do that, and then you've got your musicians that are there working with you to do that. They're more important than how I look, right? So, because for me, every time I get up there, I know there's people that I would like to impress. Oh, I mean, let's be honest.
Right.
It's like, hey, and Wheatland has really talented people that are in the congregation and know what's wrong with the music. They know what's wrong with the music. So I'm not fooling them, right?
Right.
I know what's wrong. They know what's wrong. If I don't want to focus on that, like, I don't want to focus on what's wrong. I want to, so while things are, but I have a good ear and I know music, so I know what's wrong while we're playing. Oh, the time is really bad right here.
Right.
The harmonies are messed up. Those are wrong notes. So-and-so's lost. I'm still looking for that moment of joy. This part is joy. And because if you're ready to get on that part right there, that's where the worship happens.
Right.
Right. It's because you're trying to help people experience joy of the Lord. They're worshiping the Lord. Yeah. And so the same thing, if I'm in a bar playing music, it's no different. There's people out there, and the band that I'm playing with is too loud, and the waitresses are dropping glasses, and, the amps are humming because of the fluorescent lights, and a lot of things are wrong. But there's going to be these moments, and just there's the joy, and let it go and let it rip for that moment, and then deal with the things that aren't right a few moments later.
Right.
Until the next moment of joy happens. And so just, I don't know, maybe that's a life lesson there, right? Because that's how life is.
Sure sounds like it. Yeah, it's a roller coaster. You got to work for those moments of joy.
Yeah, you got to be ready for them. You can't miss them because of all the things that were wrong. Because when it's all about how I look to people, so I guess what it is I've looked bad enough to people enough times to where I don't care anymore. I want things to be as good as they can possibly be, and I want them to be excellent. I do. So I work towards that. But I'm not going to beat myself up about the things that didn't come up to what I thought they should have been, or somebody else thought they should have been, or whatever,
You can't do that.
You can't do that.
You can't do that. If you do that, you're going to be in a spiral forever. Because not only are you your worst critic, and that can go on forever and ever, but you're never going to impress everybody anyway.
Well, that's the other thing. You do something and you make a song choice. And you do it, and half the people, it was the most touching thing that they've ever experienced in their life, and the other half of the people hate it.
Yep.
And so this is one thing about Wheatland Presbyterian, being the music director there. It's been absolutely amazing, because the music culture that Matt and the other musicians that were there before me helped establish was very eclectic, and that was a great thing to walk into, because the idea, I go into it with the idea, for instance, we do music in the beginning of a service that's called a prelude, and could be congregation participates and sings, could be just music or whatever. And I come up with one of those every week, right? There's something every week to do. So one week I might, like a couple of weeks ago, we did Steve Reich's clapping music. It's just two guys clapping, and then it might be something with just piano and a bass, or it might be a whole band thing, or, violin or classical piece, or a contemporary song, whatever. So the idea that people there are not looking for this one thing to say their worship experience was valuable or whatever, that they had they're not looking for a certain thing. And so one week, they know one week if I choose something that they didn't really relate to at all, or do, that the next week
it'll be different.
It'll be different. So I look at it that way. One week, half the people are going to have a great experience, and the other half are going to be like, what was that? The next week, that will be flipped,
right?
Hopefully. Yeah.
That's the goal. Well, we're running out of radio time, but we'll keep going on Facebook Live because I have a lot of different questions to ask. So if you want to follow us on facebook.com/The Story Corey Rosen, please do so. And if you really want to support us, please share, like, subscribe, follow, all the marketing stuff that you have to do. Because it is a little bit of a shame that the only way to get somewhere is by participating in the algorithms that be.
Well, they're just tools, right?
They're just tools, yeah.
Yeah, right. So everybody uses the tools that they think are the best. It's the way it goes.
It's the way it goes, and such is the way is life. If you really want to support us, please do check out our merchandise. We have these really cool stickers, vinyl stickers actually, and they're really scratch proof. My cat got a hold of one of them, and they were as pristine as ever. And I was really surprised. I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
They're indestructible stickers.
At least for cats. I won't say indestructible, but for cats, yes, maybe so. So we also have hoodies that are coming out with the logo on the front and the first 50 guests on the back. Right now we're gonna take a 5-minute break, and I'm gonna play my song that I wrote 2 years ago called "You Remain." It's a song that I wrote during COVID, and when everything is shutting down, I just realized, okay, God is the only thing that really remains in this life. With that said, this is "You Remain."
When I am weak, can no longer speak, you are there, right beside me. When all hope is lost, and I can't bear the cost, you are there, paying it for me. And when things turn to dust, and there's nothing to trust, you are there, honest to me. Oh, it's clear who you're meant to be. You are my strength. You are my faith. When all things fade away, you remain. When I've been crying, everything is dying, you are there, breathing life into me. And all I do is fear, and nothing seems clear. You are there, comforting me. Oh, it's clear who you're meant to be. Oh, you are my strength. You are my faith. When all things fade away, you remain. So I'm gonna sing and shout and tell them all. That's when every kingdom falls. Yeah, you remain. So I'm gonna sing and shout and tell them all. That's when every kingdom falls. Yeah, you remain. So I'm gonna sing and shout and tell them all. That's when every kingdom falls. Yeah, you remain. So I'm gonna sing and shout and
And that was my song "You Remain." You can find that anywhere. Also, if you enjoyed that, be sure to follow us on Spotify, all streaming platforms, Instagram as well at The Story Corey Rosen. That's CoryRosen. For those on the radio, we're gonna get you back to the music. Yeah.
What?
Oh, I thought you had something to say. You're like, and then stopped. So here's some questions for you. You have had all of these teachers, all of these students. What are some of the things that you learned from your students that really surprised you?
You know, that's great because we were talking before about, and I don't remember what the subject was, and something about learning. And yeah, that's the thing. I learn from the students all the time. So what do I learn? Well, all kinds of things. I would have to think deep to think about some of the big things that I've learned. But, you know, it's everything from a student does something with a guitar and they do a certain fingering, and I'm like, no, that's the wrong fingering. You don't want to do that. And then I'll say, wait a minute. Actually, that kind of works. Why wouldn't you do it that way? And then I try it, and I'm like, you know what? That's a good fingering. That's not typical, but it really works in this situation, right? And so I've just learned something new, and I incorporate that, and I teach that to the next student. You know, and it's just like passing those things along. So it's kind of being open to what the student's saying to you or asking you or what they're doing. And there's, as the teacher's always, you know, I'm here to show you the right way to do things, right? Well, and my philosophy is not like that at all when I teach. So let's say I teach somebody music theory, and, you know, I'll preface the whole music theory thing. So music theory is the study of how pitches and all combine and make harmonies and melodies and stuff. And I'll say, you know, music theory, what is that? Is it some kind of laws of music that somebody made up? You know, did they make these rules up? Well, no, it's that people played music, and then analyzing it after the fact, we've come to notice these patterns. So these are like underlying principles of music.
This is the way it was done. Therefore, this is the way it should be done from now on.
Right. And I go a step further with that is here's why it was done, because there's an underlying principle under that is truthful, that makes it sensible to do it that way, right?
Right.
In other words, people didn't make it up and then it was a good way to do it. They discovered it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like they discovered gravity, and gravity works a certain way, and because gravity works a certain way, people have learned to handle it a certain way. And so pitches, people didn't make up and didn't invent pitch. Right?
It was already a thing.
Pitch is a thing that God made,
Right.
So, and pitches have frequencies, and they combine certain ways because of the math, underlying math, right?
Science.
And so that's why people gravitate towards combining them these ways. But it's not right.
Yeah, it's just the way it is.
Right. But, you know, it goes further in that music's a great thing to teach because it encompasses so much. So, you know, like we use with the 12-tone system, a piano of 12 evenly tuned notes.
Right.
But there's so many other pitch systems that have been around, and from other cultures and from other time periods, and what makes them sound right to the people there. So music has this aspect of, yeah, there are underlying scientific principles, but it's also like a language in that it's something you hear, and people pick up languages by hearing them and imitating them. So in other words, I speak English because everybody around me spoke English. I hear music in 12 even-tempered notes, if that's the right
It's
word.
well-tempered clavier.
Well-tempered, yes. I hear music in 12 tempered notes because that's what I heard, right?
Yeah.
But people from other cultures hear music in 9-tone scales that have notes in between our notes and all that, and they're used to hearing it, right? So it's right to them.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's underlying principles about why you say one works this way and one, so
it's incredible the amount of scales that you can create with just dividing an octave in different ways, or what we consider to be an octave. Some of the scales that I've run into are super interesting, where they have like 13 notes in one scale, and it's a non-repetitive, or there's some scales that are non-repetitive. There's no octave.
Right.
So it is. So it's just wild to me that and they make really interesting music that sounds weird, but it's not bad. It's just it intrigues you.
Right. So I guess the underlying question there is: had you heard music made of those tones from the time you were a baby, would it sound natural? Would you be hearing kind of an inside melody to it that you sort of don't hear now because you're not used to distinguishing one note from another, or is that not true at all? I'm not sure.
That sounds like
because I listen to music on, people make what are called quarter tone guitars. So they take the 12 frets of a guitar and they put an extra fret, and there's quarter tones. And you can hear the difference between a quarter tone. A quarter tone is what makes blues, because when people are bending notes, they're
you get neutral thirds
in between the notes, right? So, and that's expressive and that's cool. But then when I hear people try to play music on the quarter tone guitar without bending notes or sort of putting it in that realm, but actually just playing, it just sounds out of tune. I mean, it doesn't sound, and I want it to work, because that's the part of me that's kind of a systems person or whatever. Like, I like to get to the nuts and bolts things, which is also good for a good kind of temperament to have when you teach. Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of teachers, people that teach, but they don't necessarily enjoy it, but they don't like getting to the sort of nuts and bolts underneath, because if you can get to that, it's easier to diagnose what's going on with a student and sort of help them make changes.
Easy to progress.
Yeah, to help them progress. And say, well, I've looked at why we hit a drum like this, and here's the principle behind it, and teach that to the student, and then things, then now they have the building blocks.
Right.
So building blocks wise, I want quarter tones and things like that, these more esoteric ways of thinking about it, to work. But then when I hear it back, it's not achieving it. I'm like, okay, maybe quarter tones aren't the way to go. But that's kind of how I approach art and just sort of everything that I like to learn about or whatever. I don't really learn it because somebody told me this is the way you do it. I learned terribly that way. So if somebody says, here's a 7-tone scale, it has a whole step, a half step, or whatever, here's how you do it, and I'm like, okay, great. Why? Because you say so?
Right.
What if I did it this way? Then wouldn't that work? So what I tend to do is take some concept that I've been taught and then try to make my own. I'm like, no, I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to formulate it this way. Mm-hmm. And normally what happens is I start to rebuild my own way of doing it. And as I'm doing that, I realize, oh, that's why they do it this way. Because it makes sense. Now I know. Now I know why it makes sense, right? And that's important to know.
Yeah, it is. It's very much important to know.
A lot of people don't, and that goes to different personality types I've found, right? Because there's a lot of people in life that doesn't help them to know why you do it the right way.
Yeah, it's just an extra curiosity for them. or an extra
They
information.
know, and they don't even want to know. That's almost a
fair enough,
burden.
yeah.
Like you try to explain it to them, and it's like a burden to them. It's their personality, it's their temperament and bent. They're better just like, tell me how to do it, and I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of envy them in one sense, but that's not me. To me, it's like, you tell me how to do it, and I'm like, okay, I'll try that. Now, but why can't I do it this way? And I'll try it my way.
Mm-hmm.
And then be like, okay, now I understand why we do it this way. And a lot of people don't. So, if we want to relate this back to music, I think a lot of musicians don't understand time signatures.
Yeah.
Like 2/4 and 4/4 and 3/4 and 2/2 and like.
Why not?
Well, okay, I'll test you. You're a composition major, so let me see how this goes. Okay, why do we call 4/4? How come sometimes we don't have to write the numbers 4/4? Because we know, we were taught from the very beginning that the 4 on top is how many beats there are,
Yeah.
and the 4 on bottom is what kind of note gets the beat,
Yeah.
right? So 4 quarter notes is 4/4. And we often call that common time, so we write a C.
Yeah.
Why is 4/4 common time?
It's most likely because it's what we've been accustomed to.
Well, that would be the most, it'd be like, oh, well, it's the most common
Yeah.
time, so it's C. I don't think so. Although I don't study musicology or music history, so I may be just making this up, but I think there's something to this. 4/4 is common time because that's the measure, that's a whole.
It's a whole.
Right?
Yeah.
And we name our notes off of that. So when we call a note a quarter note, it's a quarter of what?
Of a whole.
Of a whole. There's 4 in the common time. If we have a half note, there's 2.
Halftime.
It's
the C with the cut in it.
Well, that's cut time.
Yeah.
Cut time is still a whole. Yeah, it's a C with a cut.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. It's still a whole. It's 2 halves, but there's 2 halves in. It's like, and I had to kind of come to this conclusion to teach people time signatures. Like 6/8 is 6/8 notes, and 3/4 is 3/4 notes. How many eighth notes are in 3/4?
6.
6. So it's 6/8.
So 6/8.
So 6/8 has 6/8 notes. 3/4 has 6/8 notes. What's different?
It's the way you play it.
It's the way you phrase it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's something.
And it's the way you write it.
It's the way you write it as well. Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And then so the time signature is a fraction of a whole. It's that simple. So if I have a measure of 5/4, it's 5/4 the size of C of a whole.
Huh.
It's fractions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fractions of a whole. So there. So see, that's like the nuts and bolts. And well, how do I arrive at those conclusions? By trying to teach it. Like,
Yeah.
how do I explain this to somebody? And then I have to start to think about it another way. And that's what the kinds of things I can learn from my students, because I start the conversation with them and I tell them what I don't know or what I do know or what I think. And then they give me ideas back. And then I come up with something and I'm like, that's cool. And then I teach everybody else that same way from that point on. So I have methods that I use to teach students things that I've named after other students.
Huh.
Right? They helped me come up with the idea or came up with the idea or whatever.
That's funny. That's something I would do when we got into more advanced music theory with like modes and all of that, like borrowed chords or tertiary medians, really, really complex jazz stuff. I'll say that. I always came up with my own ways because the ways that the teachers here taught it was each teacher here has a specific way of teaching, and they only know that way, right? So for me, I learn in a multitude of different ways. It takes me multiple reasonings, multiple methods of learning something to learn something. So for modes, it would, there's Ionian, Phrygian, and Dorian. I'm not saying these in order because they're coming to my mind as I speak. Mixolydian, Lydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and so on and so forth. And the way that they would teach it, it was like, okay, imagine C major scale, right? All white keys. If you take the C major scale, that's the major scale, but it's also called Ionian. If you start it on D, keep all the white keys, that's Dorian. If you start on E, that's Phrygian. If you start on F, all white keys, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, where you get your minor scale, etc.
Correct. Yeah.
And so the way I started thinking about it, because then you have to deal with like secondary dominance, like all that jazz, and like trying to figure out, okay, what mode are they in? How are they switching to a different mode? And all these mind-blowing concepts that are hard to understand when I started, because I didn't take music theory in like high school. I started taking music theory in college.
Right.
I just knew what I knew on the piano.
And you wouldn't learn a whole lot of that in high school. Generally,
No, of
you'll
course
learn
not.
like what a major scale is and
Yeah.
how notes are written and things.
But even
like
I
that.
wasn't taught
intervals
that.
and things. Yeah.
So from going, and that was like my third semester. So that having just learned, okay, this is what makes a major scale, the whole half, kind of thing, with the intervals, and then going full blast into, okay, this is what a secondary dominant is, and I'm like, sorry, what?
Well, see, that's the beauty of music, and I look at it almost like science.
It is very much like a science.
The more that I learn about music, the more I know I don't know.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
It very much is.
You know, and every time I get a light bulb that goes off, and I'm like, wow, now I can make this sound and make that sound, and I've got a great handle on it. I still don't. There's just so much more I don't know. It's like it pops up a whole new blend of questions.
Yeah, that's the process of discovery, at least for the lifetime of humanity. We knew a certain amount of things, but once we learned, there's a circle of knowledge that we have, but that circle of knowledge creates this bigger circle of knowledge, which creates this bigger circle of questions and answers that create this bigger and bigger. That's why it's so complex. We have so much complexity, because we have been growing our knowledge, and with each increase of knowledge gives an increase of questions that we have to figure out.
And that's why it's infinite.
It is.
And I heard this. Well, I was looking in, I don't know, I stumbled on multiverses.
Yeah.
Right? Some people and so it was basically this statement that, some people think that there are infinite, well, it goes in relation to the fine-tuning aspect of the universe.
Right.
And that without very precise, minuscule differences in the fine-tuning of distances and the Earth's
and atoms and how they
the universe would basically collapse.
Yes.
It wouldn't exist. And it's such a sound scientific principle that a lot of people in the scientific community theorize on multiverses, because they say, okay, well, the reason that we have a universe that's fine-tuned, they say, is because it's been tried in
infinite ways.
And they go, how many times? Well, probably an infinite number of times. And I'm saying, okay, here's science appealing to the concept of infinity.
Mm-hmm.
And what is infinity? It's a made-up concept in our head, or it's not, because we know that no matter how many things you have of something, you can have one more.
Right.
So you can never get to the end, so there's infinity.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to tell me that infinity universes expanded and destroyed itself, and this one is standing because it took that. What they're saying is the math for the fine-tuning is so precise that if it was random, you'd have to try infinity times to get
right. Exactly.
The number is so high, it's infinity or practically infinity. I think they're appealing to God.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think they're appealing to, hey, there's God, because God is infinite. right?
Right.
God understands infinities beyond.
And that's one of the arguments for God is because it's so finely tuned, it has to be created. And then
Yeah, there was the Japanese scientist, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, who came out and basically said that. And he's really well respected. I think he's got a Nobel Prize. And I think that's probably where I started reading a little bit about the multiverse and people's explanation of it. And I always thought that was interesting.
it is interesting.
Yeah, so music is kind of like that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I never know enough music.
Right.
And I can, you know, but in the context of your culture or the sounds that you know, so let's say in terms of 12-tone harmony or whatever, in Western music, I can manipulate those 12 tones pretty well at this point because there's only so many combinations and ways that you can do this sort of makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I had some people several years back that at our church that wanted to play an Arvo pair composition. What's it called? I don't know. I'm blanking.
That's okay.
It basically means in a mirror dimly lit, or a mirror. What is that called? Spiegelim Spiegel.
Spiegelim
the name
Spiegel.
of the piece. Check it out. It's awesome, and it's all in a major scale, and it's a piano and a violin part, and it's these rising and falling repetitive things, just using the white keys on the piano.
Huh.
And I said to Matt Monticchio one day, I'm like, what is he doing? Because this is all just diatonic.
Right.
Meaning it's all just the white keys. It's not going out of the key. There's none of all that stuff you just talked about, secondary dominance and all that.
Staying in the scale.
Just staying in the scale, which should sound stupid after a while.
It should sound stupid after a while.
And it's just so beautiful.
Right.
And so he referred me to a YouTube video of a guy explaining how Arvo Pärt composes and some of the things he's doing. And it's all mathematical principles that he's using. So he uses these mathematical principles and cycles them. And that's what you're hearing. You're hearing this repetitiveness that's changing, right? So what do they call that? Serial music. Serial music, right?
Oh,
where you take some concept, right? And you
my.
just make that thread run through it. So it's kind of taking, and I think there's something to that. There's a beauty in that when it's done well.
Well, no.
And it's hard to do because you have to do what we were talking about. You have to get to the underlying principles. Mm-hmm. And so I have my own, I do what I call fractal music. So I don't know if you know fractals.
Yeah, fractals.
Fractals are a visual thing generally, like you know
like the arts that
it's an X and Y. It's math, right?
Yeah.
And it's a pattern, a fractal pattern using X and Y coordinates as a pattern that repeats itself, kind of like a tree branch does, although it can be in any kind of pattern, where you see this one thread running through all of the parts.
Right.
Right? Like rivers.
Yeah, it's the serial music that was like music theory 4 for us, where you can take a sequence of notes and you can invert it, you can reverse it, or you can flip it, like interval wise. And I'm pretty sure that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's the most mind-boggling thing. It made me mad. Because it's so meticulous. Because you have this note line. You have C, E to G, A, B, back to C. You have that note line. You can reverse that, so it's C, B, whatever I just said, because I can't even remember that. And then you have to. So if you have that C, E, G, B, C, C, E, G, B, C. I could do that. Now you have to invert those intervals. So what is C to E? Inverted. That's C to A now. Now you have
right.
C A. What's the relationship between the E and the G? A third. So you have, is it up or down? Then you have to decide that. So and then you can retrograde that, make that into reverse, and then flip that. It's so
Well, it's the idea of saying, okay, can I come up with a mathematical principle?
process, yeah.
Mathematical process that gives me a set of tones
in a certain
that produce a certain. This is where I want to go with it, though. Those set of tones or whatever that you produce in serial music are useless if they don't produce some kind of emotional connection or impact. Right. So can I come up with a mathematical arrangement of tones that can be manipulated mathematically?
Right. Can I science emotion? That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, right. And that produces a certain emotion.
And that's hard.
That's very hard to do.
It's very hard. Because emotion
it's so
and science,
rewarding once you do it because it captures the thing that you capture just from playing, right? So I often try to use this example with students about rock musicians. You see a guy and he's just playing like two notes back and forth, and he's putting so much emotion into it, and that's emotional music. He's putting emotion into it. Right. He's connecting with those two notes really emotionally, but I might lose the connection because I'm like, well, okay, those two notes, I'm not connecting with those over and over again, right? Yeah. Something else needs to happen for me to connect with it. And so you can play and you can connect emotionally to all types of music, no matter how well composed it is or not, right? But to take a composition and have the emotion in the composition well composed, and then to be this beautiful, elegant, mathematical structure like a small poem is just really, really rewarding to me. And it's very difficult to do, but like that's the kind of stuff puzzle I like to try to write.
Yeah, that's I mean, because it's so anti-musical in a sense, because it makes no logical, well, it makes logical sense, just not to the ears of those who are listening to it, right? So having to take that impossibility of sound and manipulate it into something that I could listen to and make sense out of is very, very rewarding, very hard, and a practice in discipline for sure. Because you got to know what you're doing.
Well, and I haven't really studied serial music, so I just know vaguely about it, right? But I've listened to it, like Schoenberg and Weber and some of these guys from post-World War I. And they have their moments, but their music is, quote-unquote, difficult.
It's atonal.
It's atonal, right, yeah.
It doesn't make musical sense.
Well, it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be.
See, and that's the thing.
Right.
And that's where Arvo Pärer is so beautiful. He's not doing serial music for the sake of it or to say, I'm breaking down all convention of harmony. He's doing serial music to produce something beautiful.
Exactly.
Because those mathematical... And then I've seen breakdowns of Bach and stuff where he's doing that basically in his pieces, and I don't know if he's doing it intentionally, but he's doing all that, flipping the intervals, running melodies backwards.
That's what the fugues are.
Yeah,
that's exactly what they are.
Right. So it's beautiful to do that.
It's beautiful. It's an exercise. And yeah, you can, if you really wanted to, you could break it down in like this postmodern, what is music, or what, like that kind of thing. But at that point, what are you saying? Right? What is the piece trying to convey? Is it trying to convey chaos? Because you can do that during.
Well, yeah, but see, and at that time, there were the guys like Weber and Schoenberg, and those they were what were they called? The Viennese school, School of Vienna. That was like World War I days. I mean, that was Jean-Paul Sartre, nausea and existential nausea is what I'm trying to get at, right? Okay. The meaninglessness, the chaos, the brutality of life, all of that stuff.
In the postmodernism.
It was honest. I guess it's honest is what I'm saying. It's an honest expression, of... I don't think it was just a mental exercise, put it that way. It wasn't academic. And yeah, their music has that existential tension in it that makes you want to throw up after a while.
You ever listen to the Hiroshima piece? Was it Thermody? Something like that, where it starts out with all just violins just kind of screeching.
Mm-mm.
So it was made after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it's like a tribute to that, where they use the violins, and it's god awful to listen to, but it's on purpose because
Right, yeah.
it's showing the screaming of the people, and it just cuts out, and it's like it's a truly a what are the pieces called that are for programmatic pieces? It's truly a
Yeah.
programmatic piece in that it's displaying, and it uses all these principles, the serialism, the atonality to push it. If you you should listen to some of the classic music of the thousands and the like war stuff. It's really really interesting stuff to listen to, stuff you wouldn't think about.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've heard my share of that stuff, and I've listened to my share of that stuff. And that's kind of interesting. Because I work with a lot of guys. They're in the high art, right?
Mm-hmm.
High art, right? So it's
Big art,
we're, this higher aesthetic,
right?
and I'm into that too. You're right. I like that stuff a lot. But what do I have on my playlist when I drive?
Probably not that.
Not too much of that. Not really, because I like it on an intellectual sense. I even like it on, a radical emotions that it provokes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I wouldn't emotionally connect with it. It's just that that's not the emotions that I want to be producing in myself when I'm driving.
That's fair. Oftentimes, my playlist has a bunch of. It's all over the place. I have stuff from the classical period, all the way up from like Baroque, all the way up to like '90s hip hop, and all these different things. So whenever Bach Sonata comes on, I'm like, okay, I can't be bothered to listen to this right now.
Well, you have, and that's the thing about music, which is really interesting. I found this very interesting, especially since, I do recording and I engineer recordings and I mix recordings. But the simple fact is this: you have a song you like,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't like it all the time. And if you're not in the mood for it, suddenly you do not like it.
Mm-hmm.
Not for this moment anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what is that? That means that somehow your listening experience to music is governed by your emotional state.
And the inverse can be true too. If you listen to a song, your emotional state can change radically.
And that's the power of music right there.
Yeah. That gets into some deep philosophical stuff about how vibrations can change you, how sounds, pitches manipulate, and that goes in even the cultural stuff, like why is the minor mode always sad or stuff like that, which isn't necessarily true.
Right.
But
yeah, it's not necessarily true, and is it the pitches? Music, and that's why I was saying music's so broad, because it spans across the pitches, and it spans across the cultural. It brings all of these things into play, and when you sing and have lyrics, there's language, and what I'm trying to say is, yeah, tones and frequencies affect your physiology, they affect your emotions. But so do ideas and the progression of ideas. So music is a progression of ideas. And this is the hardest thing that I have, when it comes to teaching music, this is the hardest nut to crack with students. students will say, yeah, I like this certain kind of music, and they'll listen to songs and they'll make a judgment about that song within 10 seconds.
10 seconds, yeah.
And what are they making those judgments on? They're making the judgments on the sound, the beat, the
timbre,
what they think the genre is, the recording quality, so the era that it came from, right? All of this kind of stuff, they're making these snap judgments, and I'm trying to say to them, hey, you know, it's a progression of ideas. You have to keep listening.
Keep going, yeah.
You gotta listen to the whole thing.
It's a story. It's not,
a story, yeah. And so I say, it's like young people that they can't watch a black and white movie. They can't. They're so used to
being overstimulated.
Overstimulated by computer graphics that it's like, well, it's a black and white movie. It's a black and white film, but it's a story. You have to, and in any story, if you go to see a show on stage, you don't think that that's really happening, do you? Right? It's not really. You have to suspend your belief, right? And so you watch this black and white movie and you suspend your belief. You know it's a movie. I mean, after all, you watch a modern movie that's all computer graphics, and I have to suspend my belief quite a bit. Because it's like, well, it's just all computer graphics. Who cares, right? I like watching those old 70s movies where there's lots of car crashes scenes because it's all real cars and stuntmen, and you see like all these close calls, and you're like, man, how did that guy do that?
How'd they film that?
Yeah, right. But nowadays it's just like, well, they just did that on a computer. Who cares, right? There's no danger involved there.
Yes, imagine going to see the new Marvel movie, and 10 minutes in, you're like, I can't be bothered. You haven't sat through and watched the entire thing yet. Or people are very quick to, and also I've noticed people just have really, really short attention spans nowadays, because that's the content we consume. It's like 3 minutes now, and it's good, or it's bad, and it's on to the next thing. And I must be consumed constantly by these memes that only take like 10 seconds to understand or look at, or these TikToks that only take like a minute and a half of time. And now I can't consume bigger pieces of art, because the art that I'm used to consuming is rather low, sometimes more than not low quality content within a short amount of time.
Right.
And it gets over the quality versus quantity argument of art, and how that affects as a society.
Well, I think that discussion is hands down. It's a very negative effect.
It is. It very much is.
Now the exact details of that, there's a lot of them, but yeah, that's a very negative effect, because all of these things that we just talked about getting to the nuts and bolts of the principles of how something works. You're getting to, the concepts of that there is truth.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, well, postmodernism, I tend to say, well, we're postmodernism.
Right.
I was born when postmodernism started, basically. So I'm Gen X, right?
Mm.
I was born in 1965. So I look at postmodernism to be that early 60s period. That's really the beginning of it. And yeah, we're way post that. So some people would call it, culturally here in America, we're post-Christian.
Right, yes.
Right? Yeah, or I prefer to call it post-truth. Because postmodernism sort of, to my understanding, postulates that basically truths are narratives.
Truths are narratives, and you have your own narrative, and you have your own truth.
Everybody has their own truth and own narrative.
What's true for you isn't always true for me.
I don't even think people believe that anymore.
I don't know if people ever believed that to begin with.
Exactly, right. So we're
post-modernity.
Post anything. I feel like we're basically at where Nietzsche called will to power.
Yeah, I mean
That's how it seems like things work.
It is.
If
There's no truth but
if
power.
we win,
right?
we're right.
Yeah,
Yeah. If we enforce our will, we're right.
I mean that's the catchphrase today. There's no truth but power.
No truth but power. Is
Yeah.
that the catchphrase? I'm not up on it.
That's the catchphrase that at least politically that's what
Well,
what
that's
they
not
say.
new.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not new at all.
That's niche. Will to power. Exactly.
Well,
So
I mean, even then, it's older than that. You know what I mean? Because whoever won set the narrative anyway.
right.
There is no truth but power, but it's being used in such a way.
That's funny because I just was having a conversation with somebody about that. In the ancient world, the conquerors, the king of the conquering nation, he was considered God. And he set the rules. They were the law, right?
Right.
And then, but the seeds that were laid even in the ancient world, they came to fruition, and we started to believe in the law as a principle above the God or
Right.
above the rule of law.
Rule of law,
Right. We
right.
we came to believe in the rule of law. So we had the Magna Carta and the Constitution and the holy documents of the rule of law,
Right.
right? And now we're at will to power, right?
Right. Whatever we make law is now the law, or whatever we
Whoever
want to be
makes the law is the law. So
yeah.
we're back to square one. We're back to the ancient world. We're back to whoever gains power and makes the law, whether it's a group. Now it could be a group or whatever, but I don't know.
Dark times. Seems like.
Yeah, they are dark times. Yeah, I think lawlessness.
Lawlessness,
Okay, so
yeah, right.
yesterday more mass shootings and all this, and everyone's quick to blame guns and all that. Not going down that debate road.
Right.
Lawlessness. That's why we can't have guns,
Mm-hmm.
or people think we can't have guns. You can come on down one side whether there should be guns or not. And if you say we shouldn't have guns, it's because of lawlessness. Because nobody really ever thought that in the past. And there were plenty of guns everywhere and plenty of weapons, right? And the reason that people didn't think we had to control the weapons is because there was law.
There was
people
law.
believed in law.
And not only that, there was training as well. People didn't have guns just to have guns. They had guns.
They had guns because
they knew how to use them.
They knew how to use them, exactly.
And they had the respect of because a gun is a tool. It's not.
Right.
It's just like a hammer, just like anything else. It's a tool, and we use it to either for defense, for food, for protection, for whatever. You can use them in different ways. It's the respect of a gun that needs to be instilled to have a safe population.
Right.
Really.
And with lawlessness, you can't have that.
You can't have that.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. That's right.
So maybe the only solution is taking the guns away, right? But
And there's these two options.
that just means somebody else's. Who's going to take away the guns?
And then they're going to have
person
all the
with a
guns.
gun.
Exactly. That's exactly.
So you don't ever actually take the guns away.
They just get concentrated into a group.
you just focus them into a certain controlling party.
It's why it's the popular saying on the right is an armed population is a polite population, because they know everybody has a gun, so you don't mess around with nobody because there's a gun behind every blade of grass.
Yeah, and if that were true, that would be cool. But that's not actually the way. I don't think that's actually the way it plays out.
You're right. We're
armed enough to see that we don't have a polite population. We have a crazy, lawless, and I think, quite frankly, systemic mental illness.
I was just about to say
societal mental illness at this point.
Well, we've been raised in a population where we're all very deeply narcissistic. The only reason why, or the majority of the reason why people go out and cause these mass tragedies is because they want attention. They want their name to be known. They want their ideology to be known. They want all of these these ideas of theirs to be known and shown, and whether it be political or just for fame, whatever they want to be known, or there's also the mental stuff that has that. And
yeah, I don't know that I would even try to generalize about why people would do the kinds of things they do, but I can say this: it's satanic.
it is, yeah,
It's
that's fair.
satanic. Okay.
Yeah, right. It's all bad.
It's all bad.
It's all
Yes,
bad.
it's all bad. Exactly. What causes people to do that? So it's a spirit that's driven by all kinds of fear and anger and unforgiveness and deception
Mhm.
and lies and everything that's satanic, right? Manipulation. And
So how do we as Christians combat that?
we have to stand in Christ and endure in love and joy in all circumstances. And then you're a witness. And where a Christian will get overwhelmed in a society that's where we are, the modern society. And I mean one that's, everything's connected by media and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Where a Christian gets overwhelmed is thinking that somehow they have to do something to change the world, to change the country, to change the government, to change the powers that are. And I'm not saying you shouldn't take actions to do things, and people are called to do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll be overwhelmed if you're looking every day to see what the state of those systems are, because those systems are fallen, and they're going to be satanic,
and they're
ultimately.
Already corrupt. And
they're
been
corrupted. Those
years.
systems are corrupted. So if you're looking every day at that, then that is going to be very destructive to your faith,
Mm-hmm.
and it will keep you from doing what I was talking about with finding the joy, being ready to find the joy.
Right.
It won't be ready to find the joy because all of this other stuff,
It's just
right?
hammering
The
down
end
on
of the
you.
world is coming, and it is. The end of the world's coming. So, like, how did Paul sing in prison? How did the disciples do what they did? Well, they weren't really looking to tomorrow or for the government to change or for their circumstances to change, or it was the finding the joy of the Lord that moment.
And it was community.
And community, yeah.
And
the
that's,
body of Christ.
If you want to, if you want to change something, go to your community. That's
right.
That's
right
the building
there.
block. There is no government. There is no all power of people that doesn't stem from community, right?
Exactly. That's why I love what I do with Swan. And right now they're having a summer camp, and I decided not to do it this summer because it would be too overwhelming. But they work with kids who have parents that are incarcerated. And so I've got students there that I started with in elementary school, and now they're in middle school. And, I see that progression, and just being there and being involved in their lives, I can do more that way than lobbying Congress to change the laws about sentencing or whatever political aspects, right. or
because they wouldn't be needed if you changed or impacted the lives of the people that would be affected by it. Right.
If I could have impacted that person's life that's in prison now, that has children,
there wouldn't be a need.
He wouldn't have been in prison.
He wouldn't be in prison.
Exactly.
There wouldn't be a need to have that policy.
I need to just go right there where it is, right there in my backyard, and do it.
And start. Yeah. You got to start at the root. It's politicians like to put Band-Aids on solutions. They don't like to root the cause. Right.
Right. Politicians, the way I see it, the political process, they're not all about finding the
root of the problem,
way things work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
The underlying principles that we were talking about, and then
You just want
fashioning things from the ground up on the underlying principles. Not at all.
not at all. They just want to put band-aids on it, or expand themselves to put band-aids on it to gain more power. And the way you fix that is by working within your community, helping the people that really need the help, so that way they don't end up in the system anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people miss. If you want to change the world, change your community. That's how you it's a bottom up process, not a top down process.
Yeah, I'm right there. And so that's kind of how I do the things that I do, because like I was talking about working with kids early on, and just thought, well, that would be a cool thing to do.
Yeah, because they're the future.
Because you're right.
Right.
It's like, that's meaningful.
Right. That's legacy. That's how you raise a generation, is by working with the kids. You don't raise a generation by working with the parents.
And I think for musicians and stuff, since we're sort of talking, this series is premised on music and music careers or whatever. That's the thing, is how do you make your musical career have a real impact on people's lives for Christ? Don't focus so much on the musical career. Focus on the people in it.
Right.
Right. Maybe
Right.
they're involved in music or whatever, or maybe they're not. Maybe there's some other ministries you can be involved in. They will all add to your music, because they'll give you a better depth, something to share.
So you've had many gigs, been in part of many shows. What are some of, and going to a lighter note, what are some of the funnier or maybe worst things that have happened to you during a show?
I haven't really thought about that for a while. Funny things. I've seen some weird things on gigs, and not, but funny.
Well, what are some of the weird ones?
Well, let me think. What can I share?
Well,
Because I played, when I was playing on the Chitlin circuit, there's some of those clubs were owned by some real organized criminals.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I would show up at some clubs and they would be shut down because somebody got shot in them earlier the night before or whatever, stuff like that. But so I was in one club where the owner, who was this big organized criminal guy, his son came in and they had some kind of cake there, and they were having some big row and big argument while we were up there playing. And the son took this big cake and slammed it on top of the guy's head. But you keep playing. You don't
Right,
stop.
of course. Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
But that's funny. I often tell some people I work with who are more like composition oriented and, they get easily distracted by things like bad sound or something like that. And I say, you need to go play in bars.
Because people don't care.
Yeah, because people are talking, and if waitresses are dropping glasses, and
Right.
all kinds of things are going on.
You're
And
more
you
of a
can't be
background.
distracted. Yeah, you have to keep playing.
You got to keep playing. The worst thing to do is stop the music.
Right.
Because if you do that, it's, the facade is broken. Right?
The facade is broken.
I mean, that's kind of what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's all of because people aren't going to notice if you mess up, but what they'll notice if the music stops.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And then they'll be like, "Let's go." Oh. And then there's like a disaster on stage, and like, "Oh, what is going on here?"
Yeah, I suppose all kinds of things have happened, like amps starting on fire, things like that.
There was a story of a guy, the drummer got sick on all of his drums, and the band couldn't do anything.
Oh my gosh.
But keep playing.
That's gross.
Yeah, right.
Now, if he would hit those drums after he did
splattering.
that, yeah.
Spotted,
I recently, just for fun with one of my students who's a kid, I put some water on the drum heads and like, now hit it.
No,
Water goes spraying everywhere. They like that.
it's fun for sure, but when it's a little grosser stuff, he said that what they did, they just like, all right, and they finished their set, and it was like, all right, 5-minute break, just wash everything, then went back to it.
I'll tell you what my worst experience for gigs was, though.
Mm-hmm.
Frat parties.
Really?
You need to avoid those.
For what reasons?
Oh, just some of the things I witnessed with frat parties were over the pale. And just this kind of attitude, and maybe it was the colleges, the frats, were very wealthy ones, and they seem to have this attitude that they could do anything and just like
get away with it.
Yeah. So one time we were playing a frat party, and there was all these guys up on a balcony above us, above the stage in the back. And they were pouring beer on us, and the singer was like, "Don't pour beer up here. We have 100,000 watts of power."
Right. You're gonna kill us.
Yeah, somebody's gonna go boom.
Oh, that's not fun. So, a few final questions. What is worship to you? How would you define worship?
Well, worship is it's really the total commitment of your life, right? So it's the total sum of submitting everything that you do to God and knowing that it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to Him. I think, to me, worship is pretty much that. It's like, so the New Testament talks about bringing the sacrifice of praise. So we talk about worship in a musical sense, and we say we sing, we bring the sacrifice of praise. But I think on a broader sense, he's saying we're giving you the sacrifice of ourselves. We're just thanking you that we're not our own anymore. We're everything we have belongs to you. So it's just really, in worship is that constant keeping in perspective who God is and who I am. And that all of this stuff is God. When the bad stuff happens, it's God. When I fall out of sin or fall into sin, and God brings me out of it, it's God.
Mm-hmm.
When bad things happen to me, it's God. When good things happen to me, it's God. It's really easy to sort of go to think, well, I worked really hard and I did this good thing. That's me.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's God.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also on the flip side just easy to say, well, this thing didn't go the way I want, or this painful thing happened, or somebody died, or some bad thing really happened. And that's the devil.
Right.
No, it's God.
Right?
It's in God's hands.
It's in God's hands,
right? We're in a fallen world, and all of the things that happen in my life are God's.
Right.
He's in
everything.
He's in the failures and he's in the triumphs. So when you worship, you just put that that's all that's what you're doing. You're going. So when we gather together as a body to worship, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. We're collectively saying, this is all yours. We're here as a body, and we're giving you the sacrifice of ourselves, of knowing that we belong to you, and all this other stuff belongs to you.
Yeah.
You're you, and we're we.
We're we. So what is? Oh, do you have more to say on that?
No, okay. Pretty much it.
Yeah. What is one thing that you know now that you would wish you had known when you first started?
Well, there's probably a lot of those.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a million things.
So like when I first started music, well, how about going to college? Like, my thing was, I want to play jazz drums. That's all I want to do. Like when I first started in school band, 5th grade or whatever, and I went to the band director, and I was like, I want to play drums.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, yeah, I know. Everybody wants to play drums.
Yeah.
Why don't you try blowing in this little mouthpiece here? You might be good at it. You don't have to play trumpet. Just try it. I'm like, nope, not going to try it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to play drums. Why don't you try this reed here? You might like it. Nope, I want to play drums. So I had the same attitude going to college. I want to play jazz drums. I want to play jazz drums. Well, I didn't know myself that well because that's not all I wanted to do.
Mm.
I wanted to play bass. I wanted to compose. I wanted to do all these other types of things. I wanted to teach. So maybe if I would have known that better, known myself a little better, and been open to suggestions from others, I might have switched majors. Because the major was jazz studies, concentration in percussion,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is fine, but I would have learned how to jazz drum anyway, right?
That's what you were doing.
Yeah, because you do learn that by doing it,
Yeah.
right? And so that was the least of the things I could have gotten out of college, I think, was jazz drumming. I could have learned a lot more from composition or arranging or getting, music,
Mm-hmm.
still music. Or even an education degree. But what's funny is, I teach so much, and I think about 10 years ago, my dad and mom were visiting, and they said, do you remember what you said to us in high school, George? I was like, no, what? You said that you would never be a music teacher. So yeah, I probably did say that. So again, I didn't really know myself that well. So what would I do different? Well, maybe make some assessments different than I did back then. Not be so single-minded about stuff.
Do some introspection.
Yeah, more introspection before deciding what route to take.
Yeah, and that's important for us musicians because we can get so driven and so focused on, I want to do this. I want to be like this person. But it's so important to take a step back. And this can include prayer as well. It probably should include prayer. But just to sit back and be like, okay, what is something I would want to do in 5 years or 10 years? Or what is something that I can see myself doing besides drumming, right? Get whatever your main focus is out of your head. What is something else that I could do? Something else that I like or I would want to do? And go from there and try that, see if it works out or not.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Being open-minded to that, I guess, is the thing, right? Because, and I think it's a thing of youth where you think you know what life's about and what you want, but you really don't because you haven't really tried it yet.
Well, with all that said, you can find George at church at Wheatland. I've been there a few times. It's a really interesting, good church to go to. You guys don't do Saturdays, do you?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Some Presbyterians are all about the Saturday Sabbath.
I did not know that.
No?
No.
Pretty sure it's Presbyterians that there's a sect of Presbyterians that are like Sabbath is the worship day. Or at least I remember arguing with Presbyterians here about it. Amongst the many things we argue here at Bible College.
Right. The important stuff.
The important stuff, yeah. When is your Sabbath?
Well, that's pretty important, I imagine.
It is pretty important, but because you're supposed to have a Sabbath, but it doesn't have to be a Sunday. It doesn't have to be a Saturday. It can be it's the day whenever you focus on the Lord, right? So then that can be.
I don't know. That's
whatever day.
Beyond my pay grade, is what I like to say. I refer to my pastor for questions like that. No, seriously.
No, I know. I understand because it can get into.
It gets pretty.
It gets dicey for sure.
Because whatever I say on stuff like that, then once I start talking to guys like that, it's like, oh yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, with all that said, we're gonna I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm gonna have a guy named Bjorn Jacobson. He's a really cool cat around here, and that'll be at 10:30. If you really like this, you can subscribe, search us up just look up The Story Corey Rosen on any platform, and you'll find us there. With all that said, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, guys.